My guest this week is Matt Piucci. Matt is a founding member and one of the principal songwriters of Rain Parade, originally based in Los Angeles. Rain Parade is widely considered one of the best neo-psychedelic bands from the 80s, having influenced numerous later acts such as My Bloody Valentine, Ride, the Stone Roses, and Teenage Fan Club. Matt is the band's main singer and principal lead guitarist, and is internationally regarded as an innovative and unique player. He has recorded and played with numerous other acts such as the Bangles, Dream Syndicate, Crazy Horse, Green on Red, Viva Saturn, and Country Joe McDonald. Matt also has a long non-musical career as a pioneering forensic DNA expert in California, having worked on such high-profile cases as O.J. Simpson, the Grim Sleeper, and the Golden State Killer. He currently lives in Oakland, California with his wife of 40 years, and fellow UC Berkeley graduate Stephanie Beltran, and they have one son, Nicholas, who is an environmental scientist. And it is my great pleasure to welcome the Revolutions Per Movie, Matt Piucci. Hi, Matt.
What's up, Chris?
So good to see you.
You too. You know I love you.
I love you too. I'm very excited. We're finally getting to talk on the podcast about TODD Haynes' recent documentary, The Velvet Underground. Before we get into talking about the documentary, I wanted to talk about TODD Haynes' work a bit.
Sure.
When did you first see Todd's work?
I may have seen Velvet Goldmine first, which I just watched yesterday, and I really still like it a great deal. What is I found fascinating about it is that I kind of like the lead guy less. Fascinating about my own experience because, as you know, art is it's a singular thing, and it's all art is frozen in 4 dimensions for each individual. So you can watch it, you can see a painting today and feel differently than you would in a week or a year or 10 years.
Right.
Which is great about it.
It's funny, because Velvet Goldmine, when it came out, was kind of divisive. I think some people came into it being like, this is supposed to be the great glam film, spilling the beans about everything or being kind of true to life.
Yeah, I would say not really to that.
Yeah. It was really weird seeing it after Safe, though,
that's a strange film,
which I really loved as a allergy sufferer and somebody who could imagine themselves almost ending up like that.
Yeah, that may have been the first one that we saw.
Yeah.
Because I either watch a film with my wife or she watches it first, and then I usually never watch it because she'll tell me all about it. And I believe that we did see Safe. It's creepy in a good way. Velvet Goldmine's probably the one I dug into the most. Not just Matt, because I am such a country life fan of Roxy's, and even though they were, I don't think that many of those songs are the actual original songs, or at least a lot of them aren't.
Right.
But they were very, very faithful, and I mean, I just adore that record. It's just creepy and weird. It has that sort of same Kurt Weill trip that the Doors do, and we can talk about that later. But that song, I think it's a Bittersweet. That this is such a sad affair.
Yes.
I mean, that is just so amazing.
I love that Todd, he has done a ton of films about musicians and music. He did Superstar, the Karen Carpenter film, which was told through Barbies.
That's right. I didn't see that. Yeah. Now I got to go watch that.
It's amazing.
Gotta go.
It is so well done and really powerful. I think your entryway into it is, it's Barbies. And, the story's really tough and haunting.
Yeah, very sad.
And then he did I'm Not There, where he had different people playing Dylan, different ages and races and time frames.
That I thought was kind of a masterpiece. I really, really liked that. And it's, I tend to like rock bios. I mean, I even liked the idiotic made-for-TV Beach Boys one.
Sure.
I mean, I love the Doors movie, which most people hate. I thought it was great. I even, it's funny, as a kid, I always hated Queen, mostly because of the people who liked them. But I adored that movie. I thought it was fantastic. I don't know. And I don't, even the Elton John one I like, I don't care if it's true or not. I mean, do we care? I mean, doesn't
Yeah,
art have, I mean, art lies to tell truths all the time. So, you know, no, we did that 1967. They didn't play the Troubadour in that month. It was the
right.
next week. I mean, like, shut up.
There's so many music documentaries that have just swayed me into like going out and buying the actual record and then realizing, oh no, it isn't for me. But the storytelling is so amazing and the people in these bands are so amazing. You know, like the Eagles documentary, for instance. You're like, that that is such an amazing documentary because they're so warts and all in it for a band
Yeah.
of that stature.
We played with Glenn Fry once at a festival in Minneapolis in his like sort of Miami Vice days, or
Yeah, nice.
like probably 84, 85. He was kind of a dick, but so what?
I'm not surprised.
Probably everybody was. I'm not a huge Eagles fan, but
No.
the first record's pretty good. I mean, and
Yeah.
it's funny about them. What I know we're supposed to be talking about movies, but we're going to probably end up talking about music. I always remember what forget what I think it was one of those jazz things. It wasn't Ken Burns' or maybe it even was. And Artie Shaw goes, and he's talking about Glenn Glenn Miller. But to me, this reminds me of the Eagles. And they said, "What do you think of him?" He goes, "I don't like him." And he's like, they're like, "Why?" He's like, "Because they never make any mistakes."
That's true.
Um, so if you're not making mistakes, then that means that you're not out there. You're too careful. And the
Yes.
Eagles, everything was kind of in its exact place, and I guess that's cool. But some of it really leaves me cold.
That brings me to a question that I have to ask because you're here. Is being a forensic DNA expert a good job for a musician?
Well, there were certain. I'll tell you what came in handy. Being in court is like being on stage. It
Okay.
absolutely is, and I think I learned a lot about how to do that when I was in a band, and I would do the same types of things when I testified. I mean, I would get there early. I would go to the place the day before. I would make sure that I didn't drink coffee before I testified, for instance, and that was just because it's showtime. It really is. Because
Okay.
when you're testifying, you have to do the same thing that you have to do on stage, which is convince people that you're not full of it. And I actually trained people in courtroom testimony for years. That's one of the things I taught them is that you got to be yourself up there. It's okay to make a mistake. It's okay uh, to be yourself. And I think that was because the purpose is, I mean, obviously you got to know the science and you have to know what you're talking about and you can't be full of it. But the presentation is something that I found very useful.
Right.
It was like being on stage.
Well, I don't think any member of the Velvet Underground would have been that good at this.
At forensic science, you might be surprised. There's actually, I think the guy from Sublime is a PhD, and the guitar player from Queen is an astrophysicist, and the guy from the Stranglers is a molecular biologist. I think it's not Bad Brains. It's one of those SoCal. I can't think of it. Can't think of the name of the punk band. It's one of those ska punk bands, and that guy's
Right.
also a molecular biologist. Hell, we just played with Dave Alvin. His brother's a mathematician. He's a
Right.
math professor, I believe.
I just can't imagine Lou like having the patience to
No,
spend time like with an audience and not make them feel like they're a bunch of idiots. So,
well, he certainly encountered that in a lot of the sort of boorish uh, experts, typically defense experts. Sorry, defense experts out there. Not that the prosecuting people can't be full of it as well, but anyway, yeah, I don't think that would have gone over too well for Lou.
yeah.
I'll bet you Cale could have done it.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
I think, God, the crazy thing about this movie, I think we talked about it earlier, was I didn't think it was possible for me to think John Cale was cooler than I already thought he was.
Yes.
But my God, he's he's amazing, man. there really wouldn't be a Velvet Underground if not for the combination of him and Andy Warhol. It wouldn't have happened.
I freaked out when I saw this movie in the theater. It was really overwhelming. I saw it with, the band I'm in, and we all went together. And so much of music is chance encounters,
Isn't that so true?
and I love it so much. A Welsh experimental but classically trained musician ends up in New York, meets a doo-wop novelty songwriter in Lou Reed, and then they changed the course of music. And I couldn't handle it. And the film, we'll get into it, but at the end, it really picks up with people leaving this earth and them getting older. And at the end, like, we were in the streets, and I just broke down in tears. And they were like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, I just was like, I love music so much, and I just can't believe that these things happen through chance. It's just magical. And I just thought they told it in a really beautiful way.
Indeed. I mean, it wasn't all chance. I mean, how those you could see how those guys would run into one another.
Totally. But the choice to be in that city at that time and not be born like 4 years earlier
Oh, I know,
or
that's crazy.
whatever, it,
That's
it was
crazy.
it was definitely meant to happen. I believe the stars were, supposed to cross.
Yeah, you kind of think that if you did it and it wasn't by chance that Cale would have run into Andy Warhol before he would have run into Lou Reed.
Right.
That's what you think would have happened, but that's not what happened, obviously.
Yeah.
And I don't know the degree to which they were a noise fest prior to Andy. I think he may have hyped that up. And
Yeah.
I think just the fact that he was there, even though he didn't do anything, it's kind of like his whole persona. Just the
Yeah.
fact that he was there allowed them, come on, man. You can hear some engineer goes, turn that shit off. What are you doing? And he's like, oh, I like it. Don't do that.
Yeah, they basically say that without him in the room, they couldn't have made the records that they wanted. And the film was made in a kind of unique way too, through multiple screens, like, Andy's film, Chelsea Girls, using screen tests next to random images to kind of tell the story. And what's interesting is it was edited by Afonso Conclaves and Adam Kunitz, who worked on a documentary that didn't do anything for me, which was the Iggy Pop documentary.
Yeah, it's okay.
Right.
That was okay. That wasn't great.
So in this, what they often would do was they would just kind of move a cursor across footage of New York, and then they'd just kind of stop, and then they'd play it against something. They'd kind of randomize it. They were kind of improvising, which they said is really hard in editing to do.
It is.
But with this, they really tried to find some magic and be like, oh, we ended up on a subway station here, and it's going really wild with the music that's going off the first record. And so the film was really put together, like most documentaries, in the editing room. But they really tried to have chance be a part of it for a change.
Well, it's not quite like Coppola, who, I mean, if you think about one of the things Coppola said about films with it when he was, this is actually a good idea when you're doing any kind of art, is he always tried to make sure that he had like a prevailing theme that was in his head, so that when he got lost, he would know where he was headed. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and well, like The Godfather, what is it about? It's about family. Or Apocalypse Now. That movie, actually, the entire process is like the Vietnam War. It was just insanity. And I think that's kind of what they did here with the editing, trying to allow what the Velvets did inform how they were going to put it together. And I think they were moderately successful in that regard.
Yeah, seeing it in a theater was, I think, a more powerful experience than when I watched it on my TV. It was really overwhelming. The sound was really loud. So, when the film starts and you just are hearing viola feedback, and it's just like,
this is driving me nuts. I'm gonna go ask Steph. Hang on a second.
okay.
Steph, did we see the Velvet Goldmine? Well, I wanted to say I saw it in the theater, but we didn't. We watched it here, and I've seen it probably 4 or 5 times because as soon as I saw it, I've invited some friends over, John from our band, to watch it.
Isn't that amazing? I did the same thing. I went back to the theater, and this time I saw it with my family, and I was like, just don't cry, Chris. Just don't cry this time. The way the film starts, though, with just like John Cale being on like a game show, basically, because he
that was great.
Played, Eric Satie piece, 248 times. And,
I believe it was 840, but I was counting.
Yeah, and you see that he's a novelty, right? They're like, you're a weirdo. We have you on this thing. But on the side of the other screen, you have like heroin users, Nico advertisements, screen tests, JFK assassination, Warhol films, kitchen appliances. It's all flying at you. And this is even before, the film is really lifted off the ground. It's like the first couple minutes. But it just, I felt like, oh, I'm in good hands here. Like, because all of this stuff is coming together.
You're getting steeped in the moment that produced it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I always felt that the 60s started, the 50s ended the day Kennedy was shot. That's when they ended, and they were compressed. Not sure when the 70s. The 60s probably ended at Altamont, if you will. So it really was only about 6 years. But yeah, I thought that was tremendous. I've never seen that before. And God, what a sad start to life he had. Oh my goodness, I didn't realize the cruelty he had to endure as a child.
Yeah, his grandmother basically saying, your dad, who doesn't speak Welsh, is not allowed. We're only speaking Welsh in this household. So he said he didn't talk to his dad for like 7 years as a child.
Well, he was 7. That's just, what? That's just crazy.
Yeah.
I find that hard to believe, actually. But, when you're a kid, well, when you get older, your memories are referential. So every time you remember something, it isn't really what happened. But still, you remember your emotions.
Yes.
You certainly remember that.
Well, and the Velvet Undergrounds, you're talking about people who not only do we lean into their mythology as people and as performers and as musicians, but they really play into it. I mean, Lou Reed was a master of, scrambling the narrative of his life.
Sure. It's like Brando. He would just lie about stuff just for fun.
I was listening to the Todd Haynes commentary on the Criterion set that came out, and they said they were really anxious about talking to his sister about Lou's shock treatment and stuff. And, basically Lou's narrative in the press was that, his parents did this and, kind of were trying to basically get the homosexuality out of him.
Change him.
And she in the film is like, listen, they just loved him, and they really were just trying. They just didn't know what to do. He was super depressed. He was suicidal, and it was what was kind of being done at the time.
Just look, being a parent is an impossible task. The reason why the biological sex drive is so strong is like, who the fuck would have a kid, man? What an idiotic thing to do, But I mean, you do your best, but everybody messes up. And I'm sure they loved him and did what they thought was best for him. I did find it interesting that they at least portrayed his father as a frustrated writer. I don't know if it had the like Murray Wilson vibe,
right.
but that I did pick up on that. I kind of wonder, and I haven't really read enough about Lou to be able to make that call. It just occurred to me then. What did cement in my head was that this guy he's right there with Dylan and Brian Wilson and John Lennon. He is, Pete Townsend. He's absolutely the top of the top, and probably thought about this a little bit. Probably New York City's greatest musician of the latter 20th century.
I would agree.
I can't think of anybody else who's so clearly represented. I think they mentioned that in the film as well.
Yeah, and I also love that Lou was so rock and roll. You know, he learned from playing along with records. He made rockabilly and doo-wop records. He felt like there was no distinction between writing books or writing lyrics. And I really feel like that's a big deal for moving music into a culture. I mean, along with Dylan and, like you said, Lennon and other people, but lyrics could be taken seriously as as art.
Right. I actually kind of disagree with that, but I mean, not with what you just said, but what he said. I do think there is a difference between lyrics and poetry, because with music, well, I guess it is the same. I mean, the sound matters. I mean, you
That's
know, you're a
true.
songwriter, you pick words, and it's how they it's how they sound. It's sometimes it's more important than the actual meaning of the word.
Are you a lyrics first or a music first writer?
Probably music first. The cool thing about songs is it's not like building a house. You don't have to start with the foundation. You can build your man cave first, or your attic, or the basement. You can do it that way, and I think that's probably been both for me, but probably predominantly music first. But they often come together.
I've always been jealous of people who could just write lyrics into the void, or words. You know, when in Guided by Voices, Robert Pollard, the most amount of time he spent on stuff was just writing lyrics in the van, just nonstop, just filling books with lyrics.
Yeah.
And then he could just lay whatever he wanted to improvise over it. Just something I never learned.
Well, I do that too. I've taken to writing down when I hear people say something.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go, okay, I'm writing that down, and then ending up using it later. So I talked to him. Well, not talked. I corresponded with him within the last 6 months. He bought a few things for my wife, and I sent him a note. Um, we ended up in a song of his.
Yeah, he's a big fan,
He's,
like we
he's,
all are.
he's something about it. He's in a car with the girl, and he has his rain parade tape on. Of course, it's about a girl, but woman. Excuse me. But anyway, that was very nice of him. He's a very interesting guy. I don't. I do know that I was it high school or college that he pitched a no hitter. I'm not really sure.
College.
College. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's really
Yeah,
cool.
I know. It's like yet another thing he's good at.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God.
Where's
Like,
he based out of?
Dayton, Ohio.
Weird. Chrissy Hine, right? That's about the only other person I can think from Dayton, or maybe she might be from Cleveland. But anyway, what a weird state.
Yeah, I mean, tons of great artists came from Ohio, but yeah, it's yeah, fascinating. The sports culture
Yeah, it's a
there is
bizarre
just
state, man. It's like doesn't really belong in any. If you've been to Cincinnati, it's the South. Cleveland is the
yeah,
Northeast, and then the uh, the northwestern part of Iowa is like the Midwest. It's like farm. So
I
go
know.
figure. It's like yeah, politically a mess, but there you go.
One thing that Todd really wanted to do with this film as well was to really bring the attention of how important filmmakers were to New York at this point. You know, with like, John Cale living with Jack Smith, and Barbara Rubin and Jonas Mikas. It seems like a really kind of lovely way to kind of introduce these films to a generation that probably never saw them, or I don't even know if the people I went with knew who these people were. I had the video store, so I had like Flaming Creatures on a bootleg
Nah.
VHS and stuff. But I love that there was quite a bit of time spent with like filmmakers, and Andy basically getting his education in filmmaking through these people, and just kind of going to their apartments and sitting in these screenings, and basically deciding he wanted to be a filmmaker at this point and give up, silk screening and painting.
Some people complained about the way the film started out, but it did give you a sense of the garden, if you will, or the flower, the soil in which uh, that stuff came to life.
What were some of the complaints people had?
It's been too much time on you beginning of each other avant-garde, blah, 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 music, complaining about Lamont Young and stuff like that. But people are going to bitch about anything. I mean, some of the reviews I read were really down on it simply because they, quote, minimized the horror of his electroshock therapy. And that's just the way people are in general. Seems like they're more like it today, where everything is sort of filtered through this socio-political lens.
Sure.
I mean,
I feel like Todd Haynes, if anybody, would not be afraid to lean into that.
Yeah, you wouldn't want Ken Burns to do the Velvet Underground story.
No, not at all. You brought up Lamont Young. Were you familiar with him?
I mean, yes. I don't. John, who I watched this movie with, John Thuman, my guitar partner, bandmate of, Jesus, it's been almost 50 years. Anyway, he was kind of more into that stuff. He was more of a serious student of avant-garde music and that kind of stuff. So I kind of knew something about that through him. I actually find it somewhat interesting. I mean, he's sort of like the film equivalent of Michael Snow, or even some of Warhol stuff. It's like, it's a little harder to take in film. I don't know, your vision doesn't lend itself to as much interpretation as listening does. I mean, your brain is so focused on vision that it sometimes that's why I think MTV kind of ruined music, because it's like, wow, now everything's a freaking musical, and the worst art form known to man.
How do you like to use drone in your compositions and music you've done with Rain Parade and the Hellenes and stuff?
Well, we certainly have. Kind of don't as much as we used to, but we still do. I find that interesting to have a frame of reference that you can slide almost anything else through. If you kind of pound at it, then and that's kind of a Miles thing too that I picked up on. Not that we sound like Miles or anything, but his ability to have one. I think like a song like the Jack Johnson stuff, or some Miles. I wouldn't call it drone music, but the idea that you can hold something and then get a lot out of it. I certainly wouldn't call us minimalist, but I mean, we do use it sometimes.
Yeah. So for instance, like No Easy Way Down is just when you, I could listen to just the intro of that forever before any music comes in.
Well, that's what, I haven't really heard anybody else do that. The guy in My Bloody Valentine basically copped to taking that as his thing.
Agreed.
Which is very flattering, to be honest with you, because I think those guys are pretty cool. But I do remember playing that. I lived in Jack Watterson's house because he took me in after I was just a homeless idiot in Los Angeles. And that guitar lends itself to doing that whammy. There's different kinds of whammy bars. There's like the Eddie Van Halen one where you can drop an entire octave but just kind of moving back and forth, that vibrato sound. And it was really, I think I was listening to the end, because I love the Doors to death.
Before we started recording, we started getting into it about the Velvet's thoughts on like LA and the Doors and the culture of it.
Yeah, which is really, it's so funny. It just shows you how, well, was it Mary Warnocker?
Mary Warnoff.
I'm sorry. Don't give me that crap about Beach Boys or the Byrds, man. Those guys are absolutely amazing and every bit as cool as you. Well, way cooler than you, and every bit as cool as the Velvet.
Yeah, but you know what's so funny? She was young when this stuff was coming on, and I can kind of get it. Like, they right. Didn't have any room. Like, they're doing this thing, and they look over there, and they're like,
"We're not doing that."
Oh, you and your beautiful beach bum thing. They're like, gross.
Right. No, I get that. I didn't get that sense from her because she wasn't really creating music, but you're absolutely right. We have discussed this about how when you are young, it's just as important, like, like Miles says, it's what you don't play is just as important as what you do play. Um, and, like, we're not doing that. But I didn't get the sense that that's how they approached it. I didn't hear Cale say anything about Los Angeles music very much.
No, he was starting to get into rock.
He's like from outer space.
He was just starting to discover like Bo Diddley and the Stones and Little Richard and Chuck Berry, and he mentions Hank Williams and the Everly Brothers, and he said he was dazzled by rock at this point, which I think is so
he didn't
cool
really know it
for someone at that age to be a little bit older, and then at that point be like, oh wow, this is something I understand and I'm intoxicated by.
Yeah.
Instead of being a teenager is a really interesting look.
It's kind of fascinating. I mean, I don't know. Like my friend Billy Talbot, who's in Crazy Horse, who's like, it's like 80 years old now, but there's something about his experience that is not like ours. Like you and I, it was impossible to not know about the music of the 60s or punk or stuff like that. We didn't know what it was like before that. And for him, it's kind of like the same thing because he was like Lou, raised on doo-wop and stuff like that, or even before. I mean, shit, he was born in 43, I think, something like that. Anyway, so when he was 10 years older and he was listening to music in New York, there wasn't any rock music, and it's really hard to get to a place where you can go, okay. I mean, to me, that's one fascinating exploration of music and art. What was it like before people knew about that kind of stuff? Like, I would kill to be in the 1890s and hear what blues music sounded like before W.C. Handy got a hold of it. What was that like then? Like, I mean, there's that legend of him seeing some guy playing with a knife. Oh my God, what is that? I mean, it's probably pretty frightening, you know. But we'll never know that. We and just Cale he had that sort of innocence about it that I think allowed him to view it in that way because he didn't really understand, he didn't know anything about it. He's amazing, by the way. I've seen him a few times.
I have too. I saw him about 7 years ago. It was really sad. Like we went and got there early and just afraid it was going to sell out, and there's like 40 people there.
Is this in Portland?
Yeah, we all moved our seats up, and he came out, and it was like it didn't matter how many people were there. He was so incredible. He came out with Hedda Gabler, like a B-side right out of the gate. Again, I cried. Joe cried. John cried. We were all. It was just amazing.
Well, that's why you're the eyelids, because you're crying all the time.
But yeah, I mean, I was really late to the John Cale solo experience because I had just known him from these first couple records. My parents had that Velvet Underground record.
Wow. Okay, your parents are definitely cooler than mine.
Well, it's funny. They would have one Stones record. They would have Satanics.
Which is my least favorite Stones record.
Right. So forever, I was like, the Stones they're like Beatle ripoffs. They're trying to be psychedelic. I didn't know anything else. Had one Velvet record. They had, Barbra Streisand, some Dylan, Hair, but they had the Velvet album because of Andy Warhol, right? They were people in college who could own a piece of Andy Warhol art in their house for cheap. And that's why they got it. So hearing this record as a child, because, that's all I had in front of me, being music obsessed, but like, 50 records that you could go through again and again, and putting it on the same weight as the Hair soundtrack, as the Velvets, I just remember being really spooked by it, not knowing what heroin was, but the fact that there was a sound of like breaking glass on it out of nowhere. The fact that there was somebody singing with a accent that I couldn't put my finger on. The drone of, in Venus and Furs, and, just not understanding anything. I was 7, right?
Sure.
But it was unlike anything in the record collection. When did you first hear that record?
That's a good question. Now my brothers never had that stuff, so I was leaned on. I mean, first of all, my original music inspiration was the basics, the straight up basics. My brothers had all the B stuff, Beatles, Byrds. My brothers, I don't know why my parents let me do this when I was 14. My parents let my brothers take me to see the Byrds, and that was a life changing
Oh
experience.
my
I was like
God.
14 years old, but I don't think I even heard of the Velvets until I. When did Walk in the Wild Side come out? That's like
73, I
73.
think.
So I did hear that on the radio, but it never occurred to me. Never really.
Me too.
Um, and by the way, that's my favorite. That's Transformer, isn't it?
Yeah.
By
Yeah.
by country mile, my favorite Lou record. But that's mostly because I think it's because it's Ronson.
Yeah. Have you seen that classic albums documentary about them making Transformer?
I did. I just watched that too.
So good. And Lou is like, it's Mick. Ronson is all over this. He's playing the piano parts. He arranged the strings. He did all these cool backing vocals. It just,
And
God,
I mean, come on, that guitar on Vicious is just so hot. He
it's so good.
for me, he's top 5 all time. I love Mick Ronson to death. I love his solo records to death. I think he kind of got fucked over by Bowie, but that's another story. But
Well, did you see the recent reissue of Ziggy with the Jeff Beck stuff in it?
what? No, what's that?
It's the concert, the Ziggy Stardust concert that, has been around.
Oh, is that the Hammersmith last show?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. But they found some footage. Jeff Beck on one of the nights showed up and played. But to me, I'm like, you can't follow Mick Ronson. Like, Jeff Beck comes on and he looks so quaint and outdated. Like, Ronson is just going off. He's angular. He could be beautiful and harness it, but he could be so ugly and out of tune and manic. And Jeff Beck comes out and he just it's very traditional. His leads and his solos are really contained.
But Ronson worshiped Beck.
Well, everybody did, but it was just interesting to see at that point side by side. I feel like Ronson doesn't come up in the same conversation as Beck. Is all I'm saying.
Well, yeah, I think he's a highly underrated musician,
Absolutely.
and man, do I love him. He really makes that record in a million different ways. And Perfect Day, which is probably my favorite Lou Reed song ever. Yeah, that song, holy shit. He made me feel like I was someone else, someone good. I mean, if that isn't Lou to a T, you know, just wow. He's uh he's just a spectacular writer, and he really, I think he would have been. I mean, he could have been Randy Newman almost, or something like that. But it was Cale, and it wasn't Warhol. It was Cale. It's like, hey, dude, this this music does not match these lyrics. This is like, And then like when Cale said, well, I got a pickup and an amp, and that was the end of that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
As soon as he figured out he could, make that noise out of an amp, they were off and running. And I mean, can you imagine? Just think about what that. It still would have been a great record, but that sound would not have been there. And that's what you can offer somebody, I think. I mean, in the '60s, maybe it's a little different. Like you guys, for instance, you guys have a sound, and that's, I mean, I like your songs, but you got, I like. Can you really have that many guitars and not sound like Leonard Skinner? Well, yes, you can. I mean, that really appeals to me because it's unique. Not that you're the only band with guitars, but it was that sound of that first record. And you asked me when I first heard it. I don't think I heard it until I was probably 18 or after I'd gone to school. I went to school really early. Um, I just turned 17, and then I met uh, John and David Roback and a bunch of other people. And, that. Then you know how it goes. You start to go back when you hear new things, and then you go back to see where they came from. And that's probably where I heard it first.
I love that, like, when I got to finally discover John Cale, there was like 17 records, right? It was such a
Yeah,
treat, and they were
yeah,
all so different. And in my head, I was like, oh, he's the viola guy. He's the drone guy in the Velvet Underground. And then you're like, his first solo record is like a California pop masterpiece with backing by
sure.
Little Feat. You know, at times you're just,
That's right.
oh wait, no,
Is
that's on
Lowell
Paris
George on that?
1919. Little Feat's on Paris 1919, I think.
Is Lowell George on that
On
album?
Paris 1919, he's on that.
Oh God, how
But
cool!
yeah,
I'm gonna
it's
have to go back
just,
and check it out.
he's
I
incredible.
mean, I, I love Slow Dazzle. I think
Oh
that's a
yeah, Fear.
great
I
record.
love, yeah, incredible. But it's amazing. You're right, Lou. They have some of them playing "I'm Waiting for My Man." It's very Everly Brother country-esque harmonies, and the fact that they could just shift to this really primal version of it, and I think comes from Mo Tucker not using cymbals, just really focusing in on just keeping the beat,
I like that. Yes,
and her role of being like, hey, when they went to outer space, I just stayed there and was there for them to come back. And then also Sterling Morrison, who a lot of times on the Velvet Underground recordings, I don't know where he begins or ends in a song because sometimes it's just
he's
drenched.
kind of a better player than Lou, so you can kind of tell. But I mean, he was a very good addition to that band, and probably underrated.
I think so too.
Mo too, who is of course a pain in the ass now, but I'm not sure a guy could have done that. Could have been that simple.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
so
my God,
cool.
she must be easy to tour with. They take a tom, a floor tom and a tambourine, and you're ready to go.
Her drumming is
Right?
amazing on these records, and I love that it was, until later, a conscious decision to just be like, this is the sound, and without her, a traditional drummer on those songs, I don't
You just
know,
wonder what would have
like it's
happened.
just, yeah, what does that do? They become like the Doors all of a sudden, like, because you have somebody playing all these tom fills and crashes and wanting to be like melodramatic, like changing it to like a song like The End. It would have been really a weird direction.
That's not melodramatic. That's straight up dramatic, man. I mean, that
Sorry.
is that is out there. And it's I, musically, there's not a lot of kinship there. But I always kind of they were sort of end pieces, the sort of underbelly of, of the '60s, the
Right.
Doors, and which yeah. I mean, I know Nico and Morrison had their little thing. She was in love with him, and he probably could have been a dick, Jim. But I mean, they were both poets first, both of them.
Right.
I'm really, you know, I mean, Lou, of course, said obnoxious things about a lot of people.
What about the tag that I hear sometimes with the comparison between the Velvet Underground and the Grateful Dead? Do you understand that?
Not really. I
Yeah,
don't.
me
I mean,
either.
I, I, I like some. I mean, that's where I came from originally.
Hmm.
I kind of went straight from hippie to punk without disco, but I've seen the Dead a bunch of times, and they can be amazing. It's funny. My wife, the LA punk, no. I mean,
Yeah.
I've tried, and I've tried, and it's just like, no, no. I mean, she does like Wharf Rat, which is probably my favorite song because that's
Right.
like a song. And I mean, they do have their two pop albums,
Right.
but I don't really see that. Um, I could kind of see how Jerry and Lou would get along, but no, that doesn't make any sense to me. It
Yeah.
doesn't. The Velvets are just so primal, and in a lot of ways, way more disciplined than the Grateful Dead, because discipline is not really what they do. you know, it's it's very free, and it is very DIY. I mean, we don't think of the San Francisco scene as being punk, but in a way, it is. Because the LA people, they could all play. They were all really good musicians, and in San Francisco, they just like, we're gonna plug in and we'll see what happens, right? And actually, all the best shit from the Bay Area was East Bay, baby. Come on. The two best bands are Sly and Creedence, and they're from the East Bay.
Right.
By a country mile, I think. I mean,
right.
And my buddy Joe McDonald is from Berkeley.
It's really weird how often I forget how beautiful that first Velvet's album is too, with Sunday Morning and I'll Be Your Mirror.
It is. Femme Fatale.
Yeah, it's so weird. I just kind of always forget just how it's broken up and how just polar opposite the songs
That's
are.
why it's so strong. I mean, it starts off with Sunday Morning. It's got the little bell thingies in it, or whatever that glockenspiel or whatever the fuck that is. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, but it's so weird because people, there are people who kind of leave the Velvets when they start getting quiet and pretty again, and I'm like, well, they had that on their first song on their first album.
Even I'm Waiting for the Man that's musically okay. It does have the feedback stuff going on in it, but I'm looking at the song list: Sunday Morning, Femme Fatale, Run, 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 All Tomorrow's Parties, There She Goes Again, I'll Be Your Mirror. I mean, those are all top-notch pop songs, man. Those are they're amazing. And of course, then you get Venus and Furs, and you're like, whoa, what? Okay. Yeah. Or Heroin, but even Heroin, you can hear. That's got to be when Cale went, dude, what the fuck? This is not. It's like I don't know if you ever. Do you know who John Truby is? The Blind Man's Penis.
Oh right, okay, yeah.
Well, which is it's a novelty song, but it was one of those deals where he found this thing where hey, if you send these guys $20, they'll sing your lyrics to a country song, and just being a subversive motherfucker, it's pretty damn funny.
I remember that during tape trading days.
That's kind of what that's kind of what happened to that song. It's like, you know what, dude, it's gonna sound a lot cooler with this scratchy viola and like this throbbing beat. You're talking about S&M here, for crying out loud. You might. It's not like it's not a country song. Not that country doesn't have that kind of darkness too, because the good stuff does. The real country, not the cowboy hat suburbs.
Right.
Whatever that shit is today.
It's also kind of amazing how much they let Andy Warhol dictate those, shows at this time in terms of them being the exploding plastic inevitable. Like, we're going to project movies, and there's going to be light show, and we're going to have, it's going to be an event. And they were on board, but pretty quickly, White Light, White Heat comes out, and they're trying to distance themselves from the art that Andy was bringing into their scene.
Yeah, because Lou ultimately, as much as he admired Andy, and I did too, it took me a long time to get around to him as an artist. And now he's as important as anyone. He's one of the most important artists of the 20th century.
Yeah, when I was in Pittsburgh last on tour, I got to go to the Warhol Museum for the first time, and they had one of the floors was just about the first Velvet's album.
Is that the touring one? Because I've kind of seen there's kind of a tour.
I don't know if it is. It seems smaller than a touring one. The exhibit was great just because it just showed they were inseparable at that point. The Velvet Underground was Warhol, and Warhol was immersed in the Velvet Underground.
Yeah, he's kind of bigger than them.
Yeah, but he's like, we have a new band. He's like saying it like that. Like, this is part of my iconography now. I'm in music. So making White Light, White Heat. What is your opinion on that record?
Well, the weirdest thing is that Cale sings what? How many songs? 2? Or he's really a wonderful singer.
I love his voice.
That to me that's the take home of this entire film, is that Cale is every bit as cool as Lou's up there with those other guys, but Cale's like right there, man.
He is. He's so right there.
He is truly, and he's still around, man. The guy's like, he's got to be 82 or 3 by now, right?
Yeah, and it's so cool. He'll be in Europe, and he'll do like 3 nights, and the first night will be like the Velvets. The second night will be solo stuff, and the third night will be all drone noise stuff. And I like that he's still wanting to play with genre. Right now, he seems to be really interested in electronic music for the last few records.
You know, he was always that way. He wasn't limiting. And I think
Right.
that may be part of the fact of where he came from, because it was just all new to him. Like, he came from
Yeah.
this classical music background.
But I also love that, like, a song like Sister Ray, just his bass playing in it, like, he could just play like kind of a rootsy bass line, you
Right,
know?
right. And he was, yeah, that's kind of reminds me. I mean, not really, but there was a guy in our band named Will Glenn, who was classically trained, and he, in a way, is somewhat akin to Cale, because Cale was a wicked classical musician. Will Glenn also was a wicked, wicked classical musician and a concert level violinist. But what he did with us, he didn't do that, man. He played keyboards, and he wasn't technically proficient at keyboards, but his had such a deep understanding of music, and what the purpose of it was, that he would do all these weird voicings, and bit at the end and know his way down, where there's about 45 seconds of this wild string part.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I didn't know how to write music, but so he did that with me, and it was. I actually have the score that he wrote out, and I do miss the guy, man. He was an amazing character. But anyway, like Cale, he had come from this other perspective, and he brought that with him.
Yeah, Can were also kind of like that. You know, they came from different traditions.
Those guys are
And
all over the place, man. I mean,
yeah, and I think the way to learn a different type of tradition and thinking and then get into rock and play rock from that's a rare, that doesn't happen that much. You
no,
know?
I think that's why why I presume that you do. We would like bands like Sigur Rós or something like that, where you want people who have not heard this stuff, you know,
Yeah.
or some of the, I'm not Mr. World Music, but some of the there's a couple Central Asian heavy metal bands. There's some gal from Siberia that this otherworldly wailing over, like, what is basically rock music. I really like that kind of stuff. Or like like Tanarwin or something like that. That shit is just, I love the fact that still, it's not going to be even possible anymore, but I guess it still kind of is, where you can get people who have not been exposed to everything that you've been exposed to. I mean, you're a
Right.
songwriter, and I don't know if you feel this way, but sometimes for me, the worst thing you can do is pick up an instrument, because then you're going to do something stock, and your brain can kind of. Took me a long time to be able to learn how to do that. I did, but it takes a while to be able to play stuff in your head without actually playing it and know what it is. Um, but I feel that that's a really important approach to songwriting, and I'm so grateful that you get these people, guys like John Cale. What is this shit? I don't know what this is, right? And nobody told him what to do. Nobody, he wasn't steeped in this, um, in rock and roll, because there's just some. I
Right.
mean, how many people do you know who, like, can play music but are kind of terrible because they don't think outside the box? Like, a lot. And I'm just so appreciative of a guy like that.
Yeah, his body of work with the Velvets and outside is undeniably fantastic. I don't know. I feel like it's almost a perfect body of work from him, even on his solo stuff.
He's something special. He absolutely is. And you were asking me what I think of that album. Well, there's only like 6 songs on it.
Yeah, Sister
Uh,
Ray is like the focal point,
and
of that record.
that's got to be, what, 15 minutes long at least, right?
Yeah, and that's where Jonathan Richman comes into the film as kind of almost like the sixth member of the band at this point. Well, it just comes in and just talks about how generous they were with him as a kid.
Isn't that wild? Because you don't think that when you think of them as being that generous.
Oh, it's amazing. I watched the bonus with him, and he went up to Lou Reed on the street, and he's like, "I love your music," and Lou was like, "Why?" He said, because you use your guitars as percussion. And he was 16 years old, and Lou's like, I'm listening. And he was like, I wasn't a fan, I was a student.
Yeah.
He's like, a fan collects photos and autographs, and I just wanted to watch what was going on. And he was trying to figure out how they were making a different noise or sound on stage when they weren't playing the thing. He was just like, who's playing that other tone that I can hear? Their hands aren't doing that, but I'm hearing it. Also, in this extra footage, he was really upfront about, like, they loved Neil Young, they loved his solo on Woodstock, things that I was like, oh,
Wait,
yeah,
the Velvets did?
Yeah, it's Jonathan Richman's words in the extra bonus interview on the Criterion set. He says they loved Neil Young, they loved his guitar solo on Woodstock.
Well, how about that?
Yeah, exactly. That kind of blew me away too. But I can get it. I mean, Neil Young is also really can go into outer space.
You know, I can kind of see that. Neil is.
Me too.
He is that. You know, when you think of Disney, they're the solar system. He's kind of like a comet. You know, he kind of comes and goes. Well, he's always nice to me. You know, it's funny. You not to tell like to drop names or anything, but when you're a kid, you want to do certain things, and you don't really end up doing stuff until you don't give a shit anymore. So I was recording with Billy. Oh, Neil's coming. Yeah, great. Whatever. The first thing Neil Young ever said to me is, I'm sitting there smoking a bowl in the studio, and he comes in and he goes, "Hey man, let me help you with that." So, but he came in and I wish I had these tapes because Billy did all this stuff that no one's ever heard.
Okay.
Billy had this song called "The Girl of My Dreams," which was very, very cool song. Do you man a favor and find out who you are? You're the girl of my dreams. And then Neil gets in there, and the chorus is going at the end. You're the girl of my dreams. And about halfway through, Neil comes in and he goes, you're the nightmare of my dreams. And it's like, yeah, man. He was like the John Lennon to their Paul McCartney.
Oh,
just
totally.
like,
Incredible.
It's getting better all the time. Can't get much worse. You know,
right.
that kind of thing. I just, I love that about him. And of course, he's, I mean, man.
I like that Neil Young still kind of goes like beyond the scale a bit. Like he knows the scale, he knows the guitar, but like he'll kind of go maybe a note above and then slip down a fret. And it's just, I love those kind of great accidents. It's just powerful.
Yeah, accidents is about them. You know, it's funny what they say. David Briggs, who was kind of always mean to Billy and Ralph because he didn't think they were any good, but they're tremendous. I mean, I think they're as good a rhythm section as anybody.
Oh God,
but,
yeah.
Briggs is like, he goes, you know, I didn't really appreciate Billy till I was in this music store once, and I was looking at this songbook, and Billy's mistake is in there. You know, I think it's on When You Dance, where it's like, what the fuck is that note? But is it really? Is it a mistake if it sounds cool? I don't know.
But it sounds so good. I love those Neil Young recordings that with Crazy Horse, you know, especially during the Ditch trilogy stuff, where you are like, it's so on the fly, and I love that Neil's like, that's the version,
right?
You know, it's like and then you learn to. You have to embrace the version.
Yes, you have to.
And then you learn, and then they don't sound as full of holes as you thought on first listen, where you're like, huh, like, you know, time fades away. You know, you're like, that's scrappy as hell, man. You know,
it is. And I mean, it's not, well, it's never really occurred to me until this moment, but yeah, there's a lot of similarities in their approach, because Neil is like, he doesn't do demos, man. He does a song, he'll get everybody together and they'll do it, and that's that. You know, he doesn't want to.
Right.
I've learned so much from Billy. He's so full of these wonderful aphorisms. I'll just lay one on you right now. But yeah, very much of the moment. So this guy, a friend of mine named Tommy Carnes, beautiful singer. He was in the band with me, and I introduced him to Billy. We started playing together, and he ended up playing with Billy. So I bring Tommy with me up to Mendocino, where they're recording for weird recording, and he never really got to play. He was there for 3 days, and Tom never played. And I'm like, yeah, Billy, this is great, man. We're driving away, literally in the car about to leave. Like, I'm sorry you never really got to hear Tommy play because he's a really great musician. He goes, that's okay. I heard him listen. And I'm like, wow, that is so cool. I heard him listen. And I mean, it doesn't sound right, but
but you know what he means.
You know what he means.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And they are very much that sort of spontaneous, sort of punk before there was punk, you know?
Oh yeah, totally. And you're right. I mean, the second album is their most punk. And you know, on any given day, the weird thing about the Velvets is I'll be like, this is my favorite one while I'm listening to it until I put on Loaded. And then I'm like, I kind of like these beautiful poppy, you know, overproduced things. It's so weird where my loyalty goes, but I'm really glad, you know, Todd Haynes in his interviews said that, you know, this was a really hard film to make because there's not a lot of archival footage of the Velvet Underground. But he didn't want it to be a film where it was people talking about how much the Velvet Underground influenced them and how great they were and what they learned from it. So having something like Jonathan Richman be able to talk about they're playing Sister Ray and then it stops and he's like, for 5 seconds, and he counts it out. He's like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He's like, the audience is silent. He's like, the Velvet Underground has hypnotized the audience yet again. And you can get a sense of what that must have been like to just have a 20-minute cacophony of jamming in that dark, distorted way with that primal beat and then just have it stop. It just must have been incredible.
Yeah, it is very theatrical, and it's you know, it's why I don't understand why they hated the Doors so much, because the Doors were as theatrical as you could get in a not in a like campy you know musicals, you know, Broadway musical sort of way, but the theater of music, you know, and that poetry. I mean, I consider them to be part of the same thing in a way, which is I think Lou was just kind of a pain in the ass. He just said he didn't like Morrison, but that doesn't make any sense to me. It really doesn't.
But also, when you're young and you have peers and somebody's elevating, and you're like, "Oh, well, why them?" I think there's a bit of that. I'm sure they were like,
because they made money and he didn't.
Yeah, they're like, we're better than they are, and we're kind of doing something similar. Why them, not us?
I'm sure he thought that. I'm not sure I would agree.
Yeah,
that
yeah.
they were better. But those albums came out like within just a couple of months of each other, I think. You just what's music in 1967? And you think, oh well, it's Pink Floyd or it's Magical Mystery Tour or whatever the hell the album was of that year. But those two, holy smokes, that's a different 60s, man.
Yeah, totally.
Than those other 60s. And they're both just spectacular records without a single freaking hole, man. It's like just fully formed from outer. I guess the Doors probably played a lot more, and they were, you know, clearly more musically talented, except for Cale, of course.
But this is also where Cale leaves. This is basically, well, he doesn't leave; he's kicked out. You know, Lou is basically like it's John or myself.
I don't like Loaded as much as the other two. Sorry.
No, well, first there's the self-titled album that comes after this. But what's really hard is John Cale is like, I just didn't know how to please him, and they even send Sterling to deliver the news to John Cale, like, you're not going with us to Boston. Lou was wanting to get less avant-garde, and as you know, we've been in bands for a long time. It's a rite of passage to have people leave your band or have to ask people to leave your band.
Yeah,
it's a very common thing in these music documentaries, and it's always hard to know where the truth is with, you know, how things went down. But it was definitely a loss because Doug Yule comes in and, you know, adds something different to them. But I feel like Doug Yule is one of the most vilified people in music in terms of people being like, oh, Doug Yule, yuck. And I'm like, what did he do to you? Like, he joined the Velvet Underground. He joined a band. Like, it's so funny.
I mean, he's not Cale. And I like that first one a lot better than Loaded.
Yeah.
But it's the songs, man. Jesus Christ. What Goes On, Pale Blue Eyes, Beginning to See the Light, Candy Says. I mean, how can you argue with that shit?
Jesus. Yeah.
That's a good one. He wrote part of that apparently.
Yeah, and he's saying like Candy Says, like, which is really
Candy
weird
Says.
For Lou to be like, I don't want John in this band anymore, but then to be like, I think you should sing some of these songs.
That does seem just totally fucking weird, man.
Yeah, and that was one thing I really would have loved to have known in the film, is why Lou felt he wanted to give the reins over to Doug to sing, his songs. Obviously John Cale did a little bit on the last record. Again, when I listened to the self-titled third album, it's my favorite at the time, because I'll just be like, those songs are incredible.
That's the thing about Lou. No matter what, he would have, he could have been a Brill Building dude, right? Easily.
Yeah.
Um,
It's so weird to think that, though, because, the myth and the stature and the arrogance and the haunted beauty of everything he does, it's just hard to imagine him in that world. But you're right. He's totally capable of writing songs for other people.
The ostrich or whatever the hell that is. I mean,
the ostrich.
That's just like such a fun, stupid. I mean, it's great. I mean, he's just trying to. No, I mean, I'm not him. I don't just think that this is where he stops. I really love a lot of his stuff later.
Me too.
And there's something truly unusual about the way he can. It's almost country in the sense that he, almost like a freaking Waylon Jennings, where he can almost talk his way through a song.
Yeah.
And he's not really singing, but it's. Plus, he gets away with shit that, and the color goes, oh, dude, like I Want to Be Black,
right,
which is pretty not PC.
No.
But I like it.
It's a great album. The Blue Mask, where he's working with Robert Quine and they're in different guitar tunings. And it was, for a lot of it, was like really improvised.
Yeah, that guy's a wicked guitar player.
One thing I have heard from people is that it takes a while to get into the music of the Velvet Underground. And once you get into it, past the first album, it goes pretty quickly. Like, they don't spend a lot of time on the third album. They don't spend a lot of time on Loaded, except for that Lou wanted to be a proper rock and roll band, and they play like, Rock and Roll and Sweet Jane. But it doesn't really get in too much about like them not asking. Mo was pregnant and her not playing on the record.
Unloaded. Okay, well, maybe that's why I don't like it as much. I don't know.
Yeah. She did not play on it, and she was really bummed out. I believe Sterling was too. Like, why don't you just wait a little while? But these albums also, even though they sound like the Velvet Underground, they're so different.
What she got out from under Andy, I think, and maybe Cale too. Maybe Cale was just too much of a strong influence to let him cut loose. So maybe he just felt freed by it. I don't know. I think he also really, really wanted to be famous and rich, and that must have been hard.
In the film, his friends are constantly saying, in high school, he was like, I want to be rich and famous. I want to be a star.
Right. Well, he was.
He made no bones about it.
Right.
But what's fascinating is you watch these interviews with him, and he doesn't play the game of somebody who wants to be a star. He's just incredible.
Well, he's kind of complicated guy, kind of full of shit.
Yeah.
I love Rock and Roll Animal. I love the wailing, almost Alice Cooper-esque guitar duo shit. And he was fine with that. I mean, that version. As a matter of fact, that's where I heard it first. Probably the first Lou that I was paying attention to was that record, was the Dick Wagner and Steve Hunter. Is that right? I think those two guitars. I mean, and the Sweet Jane that goes on for like forever.
Right.
But that's just like, that's that kind of Ronson, just glorious Gibson guitaring, man, that I just adore. That shit's great.
Yeah, me too. I'm a sucker for that. The film obviously doesn't get into their post-career very much. It's, there's a very accelerated ending where you're seeing them age and doing stuff together and, reforming. And I think there's a little glimpse of Songs for Drella, which, have you seen that film yet? Songs for Drella?
No, that's the reunion for Andy, right?
Yeah, where Lou and John came together to write songs about Andy Warhol after he had died.
Isn't that crazy? It takes somebody to die before you get back together. Let that be a lesson to us. Don't wait till people die.
I think it's incredible. It's one of, I think, their high water marks for both of them. It's so honest, and also they're really, like, there's a point where John Cale is reading from Andy Warhol's diary, and basically Lou is sitting across from him playing, his guitar, and he's like, Lou ignored me today at a party. He won't even look at me. And they're saying this, and it's very painful. And Lou is having to acknowledge that, yeah, I wasn't really there for you at the end of your life. Really powerful film. And it's also interesting, by the time they finished the record, they hated each other again. And so when they were convinced to do this film, you can just see, like, John Cale will once in a while give a little smile to Lou, and Lou, nothing back.
Not going to do
nothing back. But it is, I think it's really, if you can track it down, really worth seeing. It has the spirit of this film, too, where there's rear projection, but then it's just the two of them. And the nice thing about this film is, even though they're including all these filmmakers and Lamont Young and people that influence them and their friends and high school people, it never feels like it takes you out of the magic of the Velvet Underground and where this story is going, like some music documentaries can.
Right.
Yeah, this film could have been sprinkled with Sonic Youth and Dave Grohl and everyone. Everybody loves the Velvet Underground now,
right.
you know. But I love that it left you to realize how forward they were, how alone they were, how appreciated they were in certain pockets, but really just like they were making this stuff in a vacuum.
Well, only a vacuum in the sense of it, a rock and roll vacuum. I mean, they were in the absolute center of the cool art world at that time.
True, right.
And Andy decided that painting was dead until he ran into Basquiat, which is another amazing movie, by the way. I'm sure you've seen that.
Basquiat?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just rewatched it recently where David Bowie's playing Andy and stuff.
I don't like beer.
He actually does
a good job.
There's a great documentary that came out also called Basquiat, The Lost Child, I believe.
Yeah. I've seen that.
Amazing too, and it's also
it's more stuff about his mom.
Yeah, and it's just told a lot through archival footage, telling the story.
Boy, I thought Jeffrey Wright should have won an Oscar for that one.
Yeah,
he was Basquiat.
Oh my God, he's amazing in that.
He is. I think he's a tremendous actor, and I've always really enjoyed him.
I loved at the end of the film, the band's broken up, everybody's moved on, and there's a really strange video camera recording of Lou Reed just in his apartment, and he's talking. The person who has the camera is asking him questions, and then it pans over, and it's like Andy Warhol just sitting.
That is cool.
Crouched in the corner, and someone's like, have you heard from Mo? And he's like, I saw her last week. She's a computer programmer now. And then he's like, have you heard from John Cale? He's like, yeah, I heard from him the other day too. And he starts laughing, and he's like, he's doing well. He's on Island Records.
That's 80s. We were label mates for 5 minutes.
Yeah,
Cale,
amazing.
Right?
But I thought it was a nice little closing of the film, and what a weird fly on the wall thing I'd never seen before of the two of them together.
That was cool. That was really cool.
And Andy just being Andy, just like you wouldn't even know he was there if the camera hadn't panned over. It was like, what the fuck? They're in the same room? Like, what?
Yeah, but I love the Jonathan Richman stuff.
Yeah.
And it really, that first first record, man, was flawless. The Well, it's the only one, really.
Yeah, the Modern Lovers record is top 10 for me. Easy.
Sure, absolutely, 100%. With 100%. Not perfect. It's a perfect record. There is not a single bad tune on that, and you can obviously see that he listened to the film. It's a lot.
He was just like, I wanted to learn, and they Sterling taught me guitar. He taught me how to. He was doing stuff for them to be so patient. Because Jonathan. I've worked with Jonathan Richman before, and he's got a definite energy that's in this film that he's always had.
Right. Not always the nicest guy, but still,
Yeah, but for them to be just like, this kid, he gets it. We see something in him. They obviously did. And for Boston to basically celebrate the Velvet Underground, where they were like in New York, just no one really cared anymore.
Right.
It's also really fascinating. But there is a great moment in the extended interviews on the Criterion thing where he says, if I could sum it up in one word, it would be gratitude.
Oh,
gratitude. And he's crying. He's like teared up. His eyes are full of water. And it's such a beautiful moment that didn't make the film. But the fact that he was like, I was just a kid. They gave me a chance. And obviously it kicked the door open for him in terms of his own lyric writing and songwriting and how to put a band together. And again, like Lou Reed and like John Cale, a complete iconic singular figure. No one else sounds like him. You hear two words come out of Jonathan Richman's voice and you're like, that's Jonathan Richman.
Right.
And that's incredible.
He's on that epic journey in the sense of like, Dylan going to meet Woody Guthrie or Miles trying to find Charlie Parker. It's like, that's the way it used to be done. You just find that guy who is who's it for you. And like it's another Billy quote. He's full of great ones. Somebody there was something imitative going on. He goes, "It doesn't matter how much you're trying to be that other guy. It's still going to be you." Like, okay.
Well, at the end of every episode, I ask the same question, but I tailor it depending on the film we're talking about. On a scale from 10 to 60, with 10 being the lowest and 60 being the highest, how many minutes of the Velvet Underground exquisitely trashing a version of Sister Ray Live do you give this film? A 10-minute version of Sister Ray Live that you could have been a part of, or a 60-minute version?
That's a good. Okay, I got you. I prefaced it by saying that there's something very, very special about documentary film that you don't really even have to be a good filmmaker. If you have a good subject and you get out of its way, you can really a person who really isn't like a super talented director can make an amazing film. I don't know where this is coming from, but I kind of what would this film be like if Werner Herzog had made it? I mean, I kind of so 30's probably too short, 60's probably too long. I don't know, maybe 40. Some way it's good. It's not mediocre. It's good. I like a lot of the treatments. It really the purpose of documentary film is to make you fall in love with the subject, and it absolutely did that. And let me bump that to 45. I think he did a really good job. And he didn't get in its way. And he didn't make it about him. So yeah, 45, maybe even 48. I thought that would. I was a little disappointed we didn't get a little bit more of. Oh, that's stupid. You know what? When people say, "Well, they should," it's like when you're like, "Hey, we're going on tour. We have 175 shows," and it's like, "Hey, man, you're not playing Antarctica." What it's like. Can you make sure that that's on CD and then then that guy doesn't even show up when you play in the city. So I don't want to complain.
No, I think 48 is totally fair. And what's really cool is I was watching an interview with Mo Tucker, and she said that her grandchild, I didn't say what age it was, but I assume they were like a teenager, really loved this film and really loved the stuff about the New York underground, like the filmmakers and all the early music, not even like what her grandmother was part of.
You know what? I'm going to say 50. I'm going to say 50 for that reason alone, because I really did like I did like how they started it out, because that is the milieu, if you will, the era, you know, from which it came.
Yeah, it's done so well. A lot of these bands that we love, you get one shot at telling the story. And this is, I think, as good as you can tell about the Velvet Underground. I just think it's an incredible film. It's so weird to think this is Todd Haynes' first documentary, considering he's done so many music things that they've been fictional. Velvet Goldmine, I'm Not There, and Superstar.
I'm Not There is really cool. I like that a lot.
It's so cool that he could, for his first documentary, if somebody says to you, this is a Todd Haynes film, you're like, of course it is. But it's not his stamp all over it.
He didn't get in the way.
Exactly.
He let it happen. And that's sometimes really hard to do. So, yeah, I'm going 50. I think it was really good.
Awesome. 50 minutes. And then Jonathan Richman will go, and then they stopped after 50 minutes.
And then we just sat there. We waited to wake up. Snap out of it. Yeah, man.
Thank you so much, Matt. This was great. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no, it was a blast. Chris, love you, man.
Love you too. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Revolutions Per Movie. We release new episodes every Thursday on your favorite podcast app and additional bonus episodes every Sunday on our Patreon. The show is a completely independent affair, so the best way to support the show is through our Patreon at patreon.com/revolutionspermovie, where you can get weekly bonus episodes and shows, exclusive limited edition flexi discs and records and CDs featuring guests that have appeared on the show, and other exclusive goods sent to you just for joining. You can follow us on social media at Revolutions Per Movie and also find out more information about our various guests in the episode show notes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. Bye!